My name is Richard, and I never imagined my own son would one day look me in the eye and tell me I no longer had a place in the home I built with my late wife. That villa by the lake was more than wood and stone. It was the last piece of her I still held on to. Yet Ethan sat in my chair with his wife and her parents around him, declaring it was theirs now. I smiled that day, but it wasn't the smile of surrender. It was the quiet beginning of something they would never forget. This story isn't about anger. It's about boundaries, dignity, and the price of betrayal inside a family. Before we begin, I want to ask you, where are you watching from? And how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like this one. I drove 2 hours that Saturday afternoon, just as I had done countless times before, expecting the lake to greet me with its calm waters and the pine-scented air that always felt like Caroline's embrace. But when I stepped onto the porch of my villa, the air turned cold in a way no breeze could cause. My son Ethan sat in my chair, the one I used to drink coffee in, while watching the sunrise with his wife Madison draped beside him, like she was posing for a magazine spread. Her parents, Gerald and Patricia, lounged as though they had lived there forever, wine glasses in hand, faces smug and comfortable. Ethan didn't even rise. He looked straight at me, his tone firm but casual, as if he were telling me about the weather. "You're not allowed here anymore, Dad. This is their house now." For a moment I thought I had misheard. My grip tightened on the handle of my weekend bag until the veins in my wrist pressed against my skin. That chair belonged to me. This porch was where Caroline and I had laughed about nothing and everything. The blanket she knitted still lay across the couch inside. And now my own son was telling me I no longer had a place here. I asked quietly, "Since when does something I built, paid for, and cared for become yours to give away?" Ethan leaned back, one ankle resting on his knee, a gesture of arrogance he never dared use with me before. "Since now. They need a place, and you hardly come here anyway." Madison placed her glass on the cedar table I had crafted with my own hands. "Richard, you're being selfish. It makes more sense this way. You don't use it. They will." Patricia, with her polite but superior smile, nodded as though she were doing me a kindness. Gerald added, "We're grateful for your generosity." His voice was drenched in entitlement. I stared at Ethan. There was a time when a single look from me could make him shift in his seat, rethink his words. Not today. He didn't even blink. Somewhere between his graduation and this porch, he had convinced himself he was the one in control. "I drove 2 hours to be here," I said evenly. "I'd like to step inside my own home." Ethan shook his head. "Not today. We've got dinner plans. You'd just be in the way." Those words tasted like metal. In the way. My chest tightened, but I didn't argue. I looked at each of them, their smug faces, their relaxed posture on the deck Caroline and I had stained together one summer, and I understood. They believed I was weak. They believed I would back down like always. So I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. Not of surrender, but of calculation. I turned, walked back down the steps, and crossed the gravel drive to my car. Their laughter trailed behind me like a shadow, but inside a new foundation was already being laid. They thought they had taken my villa. They had no idea what I was about to build in return. When I slid behind the wheel of my car, their laughter still echoed from the porch. It followed me down the gravel driveway until the pines swallowed the sound. For 2 hours on that drive home, I replayed every detail: Ethan's casual arrogance, Madison's smirk, Patricia's self-satisfied smile, Gerald's condescending nod. The way no one even shifted to make room for me on my own porch. I had been erased from the place that held my wife's memory. By the time I pulled into my driveway in Phoenix, the dashboard clock read 9:14 p.m. The porch light glowed like it always did. Caroline insisted on that. A home should never greet you in darkness, she used to say. Inside the house was quiet, but it wasn't peace anymore. It was emptiness. I set my bag down, made a pot of coffee just to keep my hands busy, and stared at her photograph on the bookshelf. Her hair glowed copper in that picture taken at the villa during one of those golden sunsets we both loved. I asked the silence. What would you have said today if you'd been there? I knew the answer. Caroline never let disrespect pass unchecked. She would have cut Ethan's words in half before they left his mouth. Instead, I had stood there steady but silent. That silence had bought me something valuable, though time to plan. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan lit the screen. Just so you know, we've decided the lake house will be theirs permanently. Don't come back. No discussion. No apology. Just a command. I read it twice, then placed the phone face down on the desk. For 3 years since Caroline passed, I had bent over backward to keep him close, writing checks for every crisis, showing up when summoned, vanishing when inconvenient. I told myself it was what family was about, that maybe if I gave enough, he'd remember the bond his mother cherished. But families don't steal from one another. Families don't erase you from your own front door. I sat there in the dim light, coffee cooling in my hands, and something steadier than anger began to form. I know foundations. I spent my life in construction. I know how to build them and how to undermine them until a whole structure collapses without realizing it's failing. Ethan thought he had drawn a line in the sand. What he didn't know was that he had given me a deadline instead. The next morning, the plan started to take shape. My notepad filled quickly. Legal defense, lock and key changes, surveillance, psychological deterrent, public embarrassment. I stared at the list, then drew a line through the word options at the top and replaced it with advantages. Because this wasn't about negotiating, it was about control. They wanted to claim my villa. I would make sure the very walls reminded them who it belonged to. I whispered to the photograph of Caroline, "You'd want me to handle this my way, wouldn't you?" And in my world, once the blueprint is drawn, the building always gets finished. Monday morning arrived with the kind of Arizona sky that looks too sharp to be real, hard, cloudless blue pressing down like glass. I hadn't slept. Instead, I sat at my desk with stacks of papers, the villa's deed tax records, insurance policies spread in perfect order. 30 years in construction had trained me to treat problems like projects, break them into phases, know your deadlines, control your resources. Ethan's arrogance had given me one advantage. He didn't realize he'd announced his timeline. They planned to move Madison's parents in by the weekend. That meant I had 5 days to turn the villa into a battlefield he couldn't win. First, the legal side. Marcus Lee had been my attorney for 2 decades, a man who could make a city zoning board backtrack with just a phone call. When I sat across from him later that morning, his eyes sharpened the moment I said property dispute. My son's making the claim. He didn't flinch, but his pen froze mid-note. Family disputes get messy, he said quietly. I leaned forward. I don't want messy. I want airtight. He nodded. We went through the deed, the history of purchase, my will. Marcus explained the steps reinforce ownership with a trust, if necessary, document every threat or coercion, and prepare a cease and desist if they trespassed. Bring me every piece of paperwork tomorrow, he said. And Richard, document everything. Texts, calls, even conversations. If they try anything, it goes on record. When I walked out of his office into the blazing morning sun, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: focus. But paperwork wasn't enough. Ethan didn't fear what he couldn't see. He thought this was about stubbornness. He thought if he pushed long enough, I'd fold. I needed to change the terrain. That's where Darren came in. 3 houses down, Darren Miles was a bachelor in his 50s, with a brain wired like a server rack. His living room looked more like a tech lab, monitors, routers, cables coiled like vines. I'd helped him once when his basement pipe burst. After a freeze, made sure the plumber handled it right and refused payment. He never forgot. When I told him I needed a system of motion sensors, hidden speakers, lights, and projectors all programmed to trigger automatically, his eyes lit up. Like a haunted house, he asked with a grin. Something like that, I answered. But the goal isn't fun. It's to make them leave and never come back. By the afternoon, Darren's SUV was loaded with gear sensors, the size of smoke alarms, LED strips, compact projectors, even a tablet loaded with custom software. We drove to the lake together. Inside the villa, the scent of cedar cleaner still lingered from my last visit. It almost hurt to stand there without Caroline, but pain sharpened my purpose. Darren started installing entryway motion detectors linked to a voice assistant that would declare, "Attention. You are not the owner of this property. Leave immediately." Upstairs, projectors aimed shadows across hallways. Speakers were tucked into vents, ready to whisper indistinct voices. Faucets rigged to gush water at random. By sundown, the villa was no longer just a home. It was a fortress with teeth waiting to bite. As we locked up, Darren gave me a look. "This will work. It'll rattle them." I glanced at the lake copper light washing across the water. "It has to," I said, because now the countdown had started. 5 days, and this time I wasn't going to be erased. Saturday arrived sharp and clear. The lake glimmered on my tablet screen from the villa's live camera feed, as if it were mocking the storm about to unfold. I sat in my study in Phoenix coffee, cooling at my elbow, the control tablet angled just right. Every sensor was armed, every projector synced, every speaker waiting in silence. Ethan thought I wouldn't show up. He was right, I wouldn't need to. The house itself would do the talking. At 2:02 p.m., a silver SUV rolled into the driveway. Ethan climbed out first, looking confident, almost smug. Madison followed, sunglasses perched on her head as though she was arriving at a resort, not trespassing into her father-in-law's home. Gerald and Patricia stepped out behind them, dragging suitcases like they were checking into a hotel. My jaw tightened as I watched them stroll across the gravel as if they belonged there. Patricia paused at the porch, spotting Darren's brushed steel sign. "Welcome to the house of the future. Enter at your own risk." She frowned. What is this supposed to mean? Gerald shrugged, dismissive. Madison laughed lightly. "Dad's always been eccentric. Ignore it." Ethan didn't even look at the warning. He pulled a copied key from his pocket and slid it into the lock. The door opened without hesitation. My door. My key. My house. For the next hour, I let them get comfortable. The cameras caught it all. Patricia rearranging cushions, Gerald lugging his bag upstairs, Madison opening a bottle of wine from her tote. Ethan sprawled on the couch like a man who had won. They believed the victory was theirs. That was exactly what I wanted. At 10:03 p.m., the ambient sound graph on the tablet dropped to near silence. They had settled in for the night. That's when I tapped the command execute full sequence. The house woke instantly. Lights blazed into strobing flashes of red, blue, and white, each pulse jagged and disorienting. Projectors threw elongated shadows down the upstairs hallway, figures pacing like restless spirits. From the vents came whispers, barely audible at first, then rising. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." The kitchen faucet erupted, water crashing against stainless steel, followed by the showers upstairs roaring to life. Steam clouded the cameras. Gerald stumbled into the hall, shielding his eyes. "Pat, what the hell is going on?" Patricia's scream pierced the microphone. "There's someone in here." Madison whirled in circles, shouting at Ethan. "Did you set this up?" Ethan's face drained of color. "It's just a power surge," he stammered before the voice assistant cut through the chaos. "Unauthorized occupants detected. Leave immediately." The directional audio hit him, then a whisper only he could hear, "Get out." He froze, spinning, searching the empty room. Patricia clutched her shawl to her chest, crying. Gerald dragged her toward the stairs. Madison fumbled at the faucet, twisting knobs that refused to obey. Ethan bolted for the door, yanking at the smart lock, until after a timed delay, it clicked open. They poured out of the villa, stumbling, shouting, dragging their bags behind them. The SUV's headlights cut through the dark as they tore down the driveway, swallowed by the trees. Inside my study, I leaned back in the chair, hands folded. Not a flaw. Not a single glitch. Ethan thought he had walked into his new home. Instead, he had walked straight into mine. The next morning, the phone rang at 7:31 sharp. Ethan's number flashed across the screen. I let it buzz 3 times before I answered, just enough to remind him I wasn't waiting. His voice cracked through the line, raw and jagged. "What did you do, Dad?" I sipped my coffee, slowly, letting the silence stretch. "What do you mean?" I asked, my tone flat. "Don't play dumb with me," he snapped. "The house went crazy last night. Lights flashing, water blasting everywhere, voices screaming at us to leave. Patricia cried for hours. Gerald swore he saw someone standing in the hallway. You think this is funny?" I glanced at the villa's camera feed on my laptop, the quiet morning light spilling across the rug. Everything calm, everything ordinary. "That sounds terrifying," I said softly. "Did you call anyone?" "We called the police," he said, his words spitting like sparks. "They searched the whole place at 6 this morning." "Do you know what they found?" "Nothing," they said. "Everything looked normal. No damage. No signs of intrusion. Nothing." "Well," I replied evenly, "that's a relief." "A relief," his voice cracked high, frantic. "We didn't sleep all night. Madison's parents are traumatized." "You think this is over?" I let a faint smile curl where he couldn't see. "Ethan, I was in Phoenix all night. 200 miles away. How could I possibly control a house from here?" "You," he stammered, then faltered. "You could have hired someone. Set something up." "Really?" I said lightly. "You're suggesting I paid someone to rig an elaborate haunted house just to scare you? Sounds far-fetched, don't you think?" Silence. I could almost hear the grind of his jaw. When he finally spoke again, his tone had shifted lower now, threaded with something close to fear. "I underestimated you." "That's been known to happen," I said, and ended the call. For the first time in years, I hung up on him. No plea, no attempt to soothe, no bargaining to keep the peace. Just a clean cut. That click was more than a dial tone, it was a declaration. I leaned back, staring at the photo of Carolyn on the shelf. "You'd have loved that," I whispered. She hated drama, but she respected strength. She always told me silence could be louder than shouting if you used it right. But I knew this was only the first round. Ethan wasn't done. He'd come back harder, angrier, certain he could still bend me. That was fine. Let him come. Because what he didn't understand yet was this: I wasn't fighting for a building. I was fighting for respect, for boundaries, for the right not to be erased. And unlike him, I knew how to build foundations that couldn't be shaken. I closed the laptop, folded my hands, and let the quiet settle. The villa was safe for now, but the real battle hadn't even begun. Tuesday morning began with a sun too bright for the weight pressing on my chest. The villa's feeds showed nothing unusual: empty rooms, still water, silent halls. But I knew Ethan. He wasn't the type to lick his wounds and retreat. He'd be plotting, convinced that a little persistence would break me like it had so many times before. That thought didn't scare me anymore. It steeled me. By mid-morning, I was at Marcus Lee's office again. The man was sharp as ever, glasses perched low, pen tapping against his yellow legal pad as I laid out every detail. Ethan's proclamation on the porch, the message telling me never to return the threats over the phone. Marcus didn't interrupt until I finished. Then he leaned back in his chair, his voice calm but edged with steel. "We'll need to tighten the legal walls before they try anything rash. Title history, purchase proof, and documented threats will all matter." "Do you have the paperwork?" I slid a folder across the polished oak desk. Deed, tax records, receipts, every line showing the villa was mine. Marcus flipped through it with a small nod. "Good. We'll draft a protective trust if necessary, but I want you to start keeping a written log. Time, date, words spoken. If Ethan or his in-laws so much as suggest you're unfit, I want it recorded." "Do you understand?" "I do," I said firmly. "This time there won't be any gaps." When I walked out into the downtown heat, a strange calm spread over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting, I was building. The villa would be protected not only by walls and locks, but by paper. Still, paperwork alone wouldn't change Ethan's arrogance. He didn't fear statutes or signatures. He feared control slipping through his fingers. That meant I had to keep the pressure coming. That afternoon, Darren knocked on my door again, arms full of gear. "Couldn't stop thinking about it," he said with a grin. "Got a few more tricks." He laid them out on my kitchen counter: directional audio modules, more compact projectors, even backup batteries designed to keep the system running for days if power failed. "Think of it like giving the house a personality," he explained. "Voices that whisper to only one person, shadows that move when no one else sees them." Psychological warfare. I couldn't help but smile. That's exactly what I need. By sundown, we were back at the villa, wires snaking through baseboards, sensors tucked behind molding projectors aimed at hallways. I stood at the upstairs landing as Darren tested one of the modules. A low whisper slithered against my ear. "You don't belong here." I stepped sideways, and the sound vanished. Back again, and it returned. Even knowing it was programmed, the effect was unnerving. I pictured Ethan's face when he heard it alone. Perfect. We worked until the lake glowed with the last of the copper light. When we left, the villa looked unchanged from the outside, but I knew better. It was no longer just a house. It was a silent ally waiting for intruders to test its patience again. And this time it wouldn't merely scare them, it would break them. By Thursday, the villa was a stage set for a play its new actors didn't know they'd auditioned for. Darren had wired every corner with subtle genius motion sensors, timed projections, whispers that could follow a single person across a room. But the beauty of his work was its invisibility. To the naked eye, the villa still looked like what it had always been, a quiet lakeside home filled with Caroline's touch. To me, it had become something else entirely, a fortress cloaked in silence, waiting for its cue. That afternoon, I sat in my study in Phoenix with the tablet open beside me. The villa's cameras streamed live the driveway, the porch, the entryway, the main living room. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred. I sipped coffee and thought of Carolyn. She would never have liked the idea of wiring the place to frighten people away, but she would have understood the principle. Protect what's yours. Draw the line where others can't erase you. At 8:47 p.m., My phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "We'll be there at 2:00 on Saturday. Don't bother showing up." I leaned back in my chair, reading the words twice. The arrogance was still there, but buried in it was something new, certainty. He thought he had declared a victory before the battle even began. That was his blind spot. In construction, the moment before the first hammer strike is always the most dangerous. Ethan didn't realize the strike was already aimed. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the feed again, adjusting the angles, checking the logs. Every sensor blinked green. Darren had left nothing to chance. Backup batteries would keep the system alive even if they tried to kill the power. The locks had been reset to a 30-second delay, long enough to make the walls feel like they were closing in. And the directional whispers. Those were my favorite. No trick I'd ever used in business negotiations could have unsettled a man more than hearing a voice meant only for him. Friday was restless. I walked through my house like a man pacing a job site, measuring each step. The phone stayed silent. Ethan wasn't calling for negotiation. He thought he had already won. By evening, I sat again with Caroline's photograph in my hand. I whispered, "Tomorrow they'll learn this place is not theirs." It never was. Her smile in that picture seemed to hold a secret only she knew. I like to believe it was approval. Saturday came. I woke before dawn, my hands steady. I brewed coffee, shaved, dressed as if heading to a meeting. At 1:45 p.m., I was at my desk, tablet on feeds clear. The lake shimmered on the screen, glassy and calm. At 2:02 p.m., the dark silver SUV appeared at the edge of the drive. My jaw set, my fingers hovered over the controls. The stage was ready, and the actors had just arrived. The camera feed showed the SUV rolling up the gravel like it owned the road. Ethan climbed out first, stretching his shoulders as though he were already master of the place. Madison followed with the same confidence, tugging her sunglasses onto her head and pointing toward the porch, as if giving stage directions. Gerald and Patricia stepped out more slowly, but even they carried themselves with entitlement, dragging suitcases that suggested more than a weekend stay. Patricia spotted the steel sign on the porch, the one Darren had mounted. "Welcome to the house of the future. Enter at your own risk." She stopped, clutching her bag. What is this supposed to mean? Gerald leaned in with a scoff, some joke. Madison laughed lightly. "Ignore it. Dad does weird things." Ethan never looked twice. He strode up the steps and slid the copied key into the lock. My lock. My house. The door opened and they filed inside. For the first hour, I let them be. That was part of the plan, let them sink into false comfort. On the cameras, I watched Gerald explore upstairs. Madison open a bottle of wine, Patricia fuss with the couch cushions, and Ethan sit like a king in the center of the living room. They believed it was theirs. I wanted that belief to root itself before I tore it out. By 10:03 p.m., the ambient noise in the feed had dropped. The household was quiet. Patricia lay in bed with a paperback, Gerald in pajamas pacing toward the guest room. Madison was rinsing dishes in the kitchen, and Ethan sprawled on the couch, scrolling his phone. That was my cue. I tapped the tablet. Execute full sequence. The villa woke instantly. Lights exploded in strobing flashes, red, blue, white, each pulse sharp and disorienting. Projectors painted a pacing shadow across the upstairs hallway. Speakers in the vents whispered faint words that layered into menace. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." Gerald stumbled into the hall, shielding his eyes. "Pat, Pat. What the hell is this?" Patricia's scream rang from the bedroom. "Gerald, someone's here," Madison shouted from the kitchen. "Ethan, what did you do?" Ethan shot to his feet, trying to stay calm. It's just a power surge. His voice cut when the house's assistant overrode everything unauthorized occupants detected. Leave immediately. Then came the blow I had been waiting for. The directional audio hit Ethan alone, "Get out." He froze, whipping around as if someone had whispered directly into his ear. His face drained, pale lips parting in panic. Madison fought the faucet, twisting handles as water gushed on. Gerald dragged Patricia down the stairs, eyes wide, shouting over the din. Shadows flickered on the ceiling, bending with the light. Patricia clutched her chest, crying. Ethan bolted for the door, pulling at the handle until the lock released after its 30-second delay. They spilled onto the porch, breathless, frantic. The SUV's headlights cut across the gravel as they tore down the drive. Within seconds, they were swallowed by trees. The villa settled back into silence. On my screen, the rooms glowed calm again, as if nothing had happened. I sat in my study, my hands steady on the tablet. Not a flaw, not a glitch. They had come to claim my house, and the house itself had sent them running. The next morning, my phone rang before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. Ethan's number lit the screen. I let it buzz, savoring the silence before finally picking up. His voice came out ragged, brittle from lack of sleep. "What did you do, Dad?" I kept my tone even almost casual. "What do you mean, don't act clueless?" he shouted. The house went insane last night, lights flashing, water blasting, voices telling us to leave. Patricia cried all night. Gerald swears he saw someone standing in the hallway. Do you think this is a joke? I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the camera feed, still showing the villa's living room, quiet morning light spilling across Carolyn's rug. That sounds frightening, I said gently. Did you call anyone? We called the police, he snapped. They showed up at 6. Do you know what they found? Nothing. Not one damn thing. They said everything looked fine. Perfectly normal. Well, I answered lightly, that must be a relief. His voice cracked into a higher pitch. Relief. We didn't sleep for hours. Madison's parents are traumatized. You think this ends here? I let a smile tug at the corner of my mouth where he couldn't see. Ethan, I was in Phoenix all night, 200 miles away. How could I possibly control a house from here? He hesitated, then tried to recover. You must have hired someone. To do what I asked smoothly. Set up a haunted house routine. Doesn't that sound a little far-fetched? There was a silence that stretched too long. I imagined him clenching his jaw, trying to find footing that wasn't there. Finally, his voice dropped lower. I underestimated you. That's been known to happen, I replied, and hung up. For the first time in our lives, I ended the call first. That click rang louder than any shout could. I sat there for a moment, staring at Caroline's photograph on the shelf. She'd always said silence could be stronger than anger if you knew when to use it. She would have smiled at that moment. Later that day, my phone buzzed again, this time a text from Ethan. We're coming back. Don't think some malfunction changes anything. They're moving in. I placed the phone face down on my desk and whispered to Caroline's picture. Let them try. The house was armed again by nightfall. Every sensor waiting. Every shadow primed. But I also knew this battle wasn't about flashing lights or whispered voices. It was about drawing a line Ethan couldn't cross without cutting himself open. For years, I had avoided confrontation to keep the peace. But peace bought with silence isn't peace, it's surrender. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because of fear, but because of clarity. I wasn't just protecting wood and stone. I was protecting dignity, memory, and the promise I'd made silently at Caroline's grave, never let anyone erase what we built. 2 days passed before Ethan tried again. I knew he would. Entitlement doesn't die in one blow. It festers, searching for another way in. Tuesday evening, the villa's entryway camera pinged a motion alert. I opened the feed and saw a white sedan pull into the driveway. Ethan stepped out this time with a locksmith in tow, a man carrying a heavy black toolbox. The audio feed picked up Ethan's clipped tone, the locks malfunctioning. Replace it. The locksmith crouched, examined the system, then straightened with a slow shake of his head. These aren't regular locks, sir. They're integrated smart systems with biometric scanners, wireless backups, and redundancies. You'd need a full reprogramming of the network. That's not something I can do. Ethan's jaw tightened. Can't you just change it? Not without tearing out the entire infrastructure, the man said. And even then, there's a backup I can't access. Whoever installed this knew what they were doing. He snapped his toolbox shut, muttered an apology, and left Ethan standing on the porch with nothing but frustration. I almost laughed. Darren's work had turned the villa into a puzzle only we had the pieces for. Ethan lingered for a moment, hands on his hips glaring at the house, as if he could bend it to his will by sheer force. Then he trudged back to his car and drove off, his headlights disappearing into the pines. Later that night, the feed showed the villa dark and still again, but I knew the silence wasn't permanent. Sure enough, 2 days later, the knock came on my own front door in Phoenix. When I opened it, Ethan stood there, Madison just behind him. She looked polished, but tense arms crossed, jaw rigid. "This game ends now," Ethan said, stepping forward. "Either you stop whatever you're doing and hand over the villa, or," he glanced at Madison, "or what I asked." Madison's voice was low and deliberate. "Or you'll never see us again. No holidays, no visits, no grandchildren." There was a time when those words would have gutted me, when the threat of losing my son's presence would have felt like losing Caroline all over again. But now it was just data, information to file away. I kept my voice calm. "So that's a threat, it's reality," Ethan shot back. "Your old dad, alone. What do you need with a place like that?" I studied them both. Interesting perspective coming from two people who tried to take it without asking. Madison's eyes flashed. Ethan took a step closer. "We'll sue you. Harassment, emotional distress will drag you through court and tell everyone what you did." I tilted my head. "And what evidence will you have?" His jaw worked, but no words came. Finally, he muttered, "This isn't over." "No," I said, evenly leaning against the frame. "It already is." They left without another word. I closed the door behind them, my pulse steady. The haunting had rattled them. The locks had held. But now it was time for something stronger than shadows and whispers. Paper. Legal. Irrevocable. The villa had teeth, but my final weapon would be a wall they couldn't climb, the law. The morning after Ethan and Madison stood on my porch with their ultimatum, I brewed my coffee, black and strong, then sat at my desk with a single folder in front of me. Inside were the deed, the insurance papers, and Marcus Lee's notes from our last meeting. The villa had always been more than a house. It was memory, legacy, and the one place Carolyn's presence felt alive. But after what happened, I knew it could no longer exist as a simple refuge. It needed to be protected in a way Ethan could never touch. I called Marcus. His tone was brisk but steady, the way men sound when they already have 3 answers lined up. "Richard, what's the update?" "They threatened to sue," I said. "Threatened to cut ties completely if I didn't give the villa to them." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Then it's time for the final phase. Do you want it ironclad?" "I want it beyond their reach," I said. We arranged to meet that afternoon. I pulled on the gray suit. Caroline had always liked the one she said made me look like I meant every word I spoke, and drove downtown. The sky was clean and sharp, a mirror of how I felt inside. In Marcus's office, the wood-paneled walls seemed to soak up the weight of everything I carried in. He slid papers across the desk. We can place the villa into an irrevocable trust. That locks it down. Or if you want it out of your name entirely, donation is faster. He looked up. Do you have a cause in mind? The moment he asked, Caroline's voice echoed in my memory. She had volunteered at the Veterans Rest Initiative years ago, helping veterans and their families find peace after service. She used to say healing didn't just need doctors, it needed places where silence was safe. Yes, I said firmly. Give it to Veterans Rest. With one condition, I keep lifetime access. Marcus's eyes flicked with recognition. That can be written in. You'll be the only one with access rights. Your son and his in-laws won't have a legal path to challenge it. I read every line, every clause. Each stroke of the pen felt like a wall being built brick by brick. When I signed a weight I hadn't realized I carried lifted. The villa was no longer mine in name, but in truth it was more mine than ever, safe, untouchable, preserved, exactly as Caroline would have wanted. When I left the office, the Arizona sun burned bright overhead. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Ethan's name. I didn't answer. Not yet. He would find out soon enough, and when he did, it wouldn't be from me. It would be from the county record. That night, sitting in my study, I poured a small glass of bourbon, first one in years, and raised it toward Caroline's photo. It's done, I said softly. They'll never take it from us again. 2 days later, the news spread before I could even call Ethan. The Veterans Rest Initiative posted a photo on their social media, its director standing on the villa's porch, the lake sparkling behind her. The caption read, "We are beyond grateful to accept the generous donation of Clearview Lake Villa from Mr. Richard Hale. This retreat will serve as a place of healing for veterans and their families for decades to come." By noon, local outlets had picked it up. A few national websites followed. My phone buzzed with congratulations from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old business partners, distant friends, even a few neighbors. They all called me generous, wise, a man of principle. For the first time in a long while, I felt Caroline's pride in the quiet of the house. Ethan called that evening. His voice was flat, almost hollow. "So that's it. You'd rather give it to strangers than your own son." I kept my tone calm. "I'd rather give it to people who will respect it." "You've destroyed this family," he hissed. "No," I said softly. "You did that yourself." There was silence, heavy and uneven. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't find the words. Eventually, the line went dead. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Phoenix skyline. The villa wasn't mine anymore, but it was safe. And Ethan had lost, not because I screamed louder, but because I chose the one weapon he could never fight: the law. On Thursday morning, Marcus called. "It's official. The county recorder filed the deed transfer this morning. Anyone who searches now will see Veterans Rest as the owner. It's untouchable." I thanked him, my chest lighter than it had been in years. Later that day, I drove up to Clearview. The villa looked the same as it always had. Cedar siding, catching the sun, pine trees, whispering at the edge of the water. But I knew it wasn't just a house anymore. It had a purpose larger than me, larger than Ethan, even larger than Caroline and me together. Dana Ortiz, the program director, met me at the porch. She was a poised woman in her 40s, clipboard in hand, but her smile carried something warmer beneath the professional tone. "Mr. Hale, thank you. This place is going to change lives." We walked through the rooms together. I told her where Caroline liked to read, how the morning light fell across the kitchen in winter, how the upstairs hallway creaked in the rain. She took notes like a steward, not a guest. When we finished, she looked around and said softly, "We'll bring the first group next month. Veterans and their spouses. Space to breathe. Space to heal." For the first time since Caroline's death, I felt peace settle over me. The house was no longer a battleground. It was a sanctuary. And Ethan would never again stand in my chair declaring it his. I didn't have to wait long for the confrontation. Friday morning, Marcus called and told me Ethan had requested a meeting. "He's furious," Marcus said, "but he's bringing his wife and her parents with him. I thought you might want to be present." By 10 o'clock, I was in the conference room at Marcus's office. The space smelled of lemon polish and paper, the kind of room where words carried more weight than shouts. Marcus sat at the head of the table, a stack of neatly arranged documents in front of him. Across from us sat Ethan and Madison, their faces tight with anger, and the Monroes beside them, dressed stiffly, as though appearances could replace entitlement. Ethan didn't bother with a greeting. "We're here to resolve this now." Marcus raised a hand calmly. "No, you're here to be informed. This is not a negotiation." He slid a single sheet across the table. "As of yesterday, Clearview Lake Villa is owned by Veterans Rest Initiative. The deed transfer is irrevocable." Madison snatched the paper, scanning it with frantic eyes. "This can't be right. You can't just give away family property." Marcus's voice stayed level. "Mr. Hale could and did. Arizona law allows charitable conveyance under full ownership. The transfer is complete, permanent, and recorded. Gerald tried for reason. We're not looking for trouble. We simply need somewhere to live. We thought this made sense." I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp. "You thought you could take what wasn't yours. And you told me to leave my own porch to make it happen." Patricia's pearls trembled against her throat as she snapped, "After everything our daughter has done for your son." She stopped, perhaps realizing the room was not one for sentiment. Marcus opened another folder. "Furthermore, we've filed a notice of no trespass on behalf of both Mr. Hale and Veterans Rest Initiative. If any of you enter the property again without express permission, you will be in criminal trespass. Continued harassment will bring civil remedies." Ethan slammed a hand on the table. "So he wins. That's what this is. He'd rather give the place to strangers than his own family." I met his glare. "I'd rather give it to people who understand what a home is. It isn't leverage. It isn't a prize. And it isn't a punishment for a grieving father." Madison's cheeks flushed with anger. "This isn't over. We'll tell people what he did, how he humiliated us." Marcus didn't blink. "Tell them whatever you like. The public record will tell them something else. A man donated his lakeside property to a veterans charity. The press has already picked it up. Perhaps you've seen the photos." Ethan's eyes flicked toward Madison. They had seen them. They knew. Silence spread across the room, heavy as stone. Ethan finally muttered, "You planned this." I shook my head. "Not from the start. But the moment you told me I wasn't welcome in my own house, you showed me how it would end." The conference room hung in silence after my words. Ethan's face flushed red, his lips pressed thin, while Madison tapped her manicured nails against the table like she could scratch a way out of the corner she was in. Gerald shifted uneasily in his chair, and Patricia clasped her pearls as though they might shield her from the truth. Finally, Ethan leaned forward, his voice shaking with restrained fury. "You've destroyed our family, Dad. Do you understand that you've chosen strangers over blood?" I kept my voice even. "What destroys a family isn't boundaries, it's betrayal. And you crossed that line when you tried to erase me from my own home." Madison's voice cut in sharper than a blade. "You think you've won, you've humiliated us. People will hear about this. We'll make sure of it." Marcus, calm as always, slid another paper across the polished wood. This is a cease harassment order drafted on Mr. Hale's behalf. If you continue with threats or slander, we'll pursue further legal remedies. That includes public statements. Consider this your warning. Patricia's shoulders sagged, her bravado gone. We didn't mean harm, she said weakly. We thought he was alone. We thought... It made sense. I turned to her, my expression firm but not cruel. Alone doesn't mean helpless. And even if I never set foot in that villa again, it still wouldn't make it yours. Gerald cleared his throat, trying to salvage some ground. Perhaps we could at least arrange a transition. Time to find somewhere else, Marcus cut him off. The property is no longer Mr. Hale's. It belongs to Veterans Rest. The organization will decide how it's used. Your presence is neither required nor permitted. Ethan's fists clenched. So that's it. A lifetime of raising me, and this is the thanks I get. You'd rather give everything away than trust me with it. I leaned back, my voice quiet but steady. I trusted you for years, Ethan. I gave you help when you needed it, cars, apartments, money, and every time it only bred more greed. That villa wasn't just a house. It was the last piece of your mother I had left, and you tried to steal it from me. So yes, I gave it away. Because I'd rather see it serve broken soldiers than selfish children. For a moment he looked like a boy again, the boy who used to toss a baseball in our yard, the boy who once beamed at me for approval, but then the anger came back hard and brittle. You'll regret this, he spat. Marcus gathered the papers calmly. This meeting is over. As they filed out, Madison's eyes lingered on me, filled with something between fury and disbelief. Ethan didn't look back. When the door closed, Marcus turned to me with a faint smile. You executed perfectly. Paper walls. They look thin until someone runs headfirst into them. I exhaled slowly, the first true breath I'd taken in years. And now Marcus. Now the real healing can begin. When the conference room finally emptied, the silence carried more weight than the shouting ever could. Marcus stacked the signed copies neatly, his precision as steady as his words had been. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the polished wood table, feeling the pulse in my hands begin to slow. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one cornered. I was the one drawing the lines. That night back in Phoenix, I poured myself a glass of bourbon. I hadn't touched the stuff since my heart scare years earlier, but one sip felt earned. The amber liquid burned its way down, leaving warmth where there had been only cold for so long. Caroline would have teased me for it, then kissed the rim of the glass herself. I raised it to her photo on the shelf. It's over, I said quietly. They can't touch us anymore. But I knew better. Legal walls may have been built, but pride doesn't bow that easily. Ethan's silence over the next 48 hours said more than his words ever had. He wasn't conceding, he was regrouping. Sure enough, Sunday evening brought headlights to my Phoenix driveway. I opened the door to find Ethan standing there, Madison a step behind him, her eyes sharp and guarded. He didn't ask to come in. He walked past me as if he still owned something here. You've humiliated us, he said flatly. You've made a mockery of your own family in front of the entire community. Do you think people respect you for this? They pity you? I folded my arms. Pity is better than contempt. And trust me, that's what people felt when they saw you trying to shove me off my own porch. Madison's voice was low, controlled. You've poisoned everything. Do you realize we can never come back from this? You've killed any chance of a future together as a family. I looked between them, and for once I didn't flinch. Family isn't built on taking what isn't yours. It isn't built on ultimatums. It's built on respect. If you can't understand that, then maybe what's dying here was never family at all. Ethan's face hardened, but I saw something flicker behind his eyes, something he didn't want to admit. Regret, maybe. Or the faint realization that the foundation he'd tried to stand on had collapsed beneath him. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, jaw clenching. Finally, he muttered, "You'll regret this, Dad. You may have the law, but you don't have us anymore." I stepped closer, my voice calm, final. "I don't need you to define me. Not anymore." They left without another word. Their taillights disappeared into the dark, swallowed by silence. I closed the door and leaned against it, the bourbon still burning in my chest, my pulse steady. For the first time since Caroline's death, I felt something like peace. The villa was no longer mine in name, but it was safe. And as for Ethan, he would either learn to respect boundaries, or he would lose me entirely. Either way, I had won. The morning after Ethan stormed out of my house, the desert sky over Phoenix was washed in gray, a rare stillness pressing against the windows. I brewed a pot of coffee and carried it into my study, setting it down beside the folder Marcus had prepared for me. Inside were certified copies of the deed transfer, the donation agreement, and the clause granting me lifetime access. Paper walls, Marcus called them. Thin to the eye, but harder than steel when challenged. I stared at the documents for a long moment, then at Caroline's photograph on the shelf. Her smile in that picture had always looked like she knew something I didn't. "It's done," I whispered to her. "The house is safe. They'll never touch it again." By 9, I was back in Marcus's office. He greeted me with his usual firmness, gesturing toward a conference room. "They're already here," he said. "Your son and his in-laws. They demanded another meeting." I nodded, my chest tightening, but my steps steady. Inside, Ethan sat, rigid jaw clenched, while Madison crossed her arms, eyes rimmed red from another sleepless night. Gerald and Patricia perched on the side bench, dressed with the kind of formality that tried to hide desperation. "Good morning," I said, taking my seat beside Marcus. Ethan didn't return the courtesy. "This ends today," he said, his tone clipped and commanding. "You undo whatever you did with that deed transfer, or we'll drag you through court for everything you've got." Marcus lifted his hand calmly. "You can't undo it. The villa is now owned by Veterans Rest Initiative. The transfer is irrevocable. It cannot be reversed, challenged, or negotiated." He slid a copy of the county record across the table. "It's all here." Madison grabbed the document, her manicured nails tapping against the paper. "This isn't legal. You can't just give away generational property. He's Ethan's father. That villa belongs to our family." Marcus's eyes stayed steady. It belonged solely to Richard. Arizona law is clear: property purchased and titled under one name, especially post-retirement, can be gifted freely. Family entitlement isn't legal standing. Patricia leaned forward, voice trembling. "But where are we supposed to go? Gerald lost his job. I can't work. We thought—" Her words faded under the weight of silence. Gerald placed a hand on her arm, but his eyes were tired. He knew what I knew: there would be no second chance, no loophole. Ethan slammed his fist on the table. "You think you've beaten us? You think people will respect you for throwing your own blood into the street?" I met his glare with a calm I hadn't felt in years. "I didn't throw anyone out. I stopped you from stealing what wasn't yours. There's a difference." The room fell still. Even Madison's sharp tongue faltered. For the first time in this war, the weight wasn't on my shoulders. It was on theirs. Ethan's glare stayed fixed on me, his knuckles white against the polished table. Madison leaned in close, whispering something sharp in his ear, her lips tight with frustration. He snapped upright again, pointing across the table. "You've humiliated us, Dad. You've made a fool of your own son in front of this entire community. Do you think people will forget this?" I let a breath out, slow and steady. "What people will remember," I said, "is that a lakeside villa was donated to help veterans heal. That's the story already spreading. You'll forgive me if I don't lose sleep over what gossip might follow." Marcus slid another folder across the table, his movements deliberate, almost surgical. "This is a cease harassment and no trespass order. If any of you step foot on the Clearview property again without written permission, you'll be trespassing not just against Mr. Hale, but against Veterans Rest Initiative. That means law enforcement, not private disputes." Patricia gasped, clutching her pearls tighter. "You'd call the police on your own family." I looked her directly in the eye. "You told me I wasn't allowed at my own home. You invited yourselves into Caroline's chair, into her kitchen, into her silence. Family ended when respect did." Gerald tried again, his voice less certain now. "We're not asking for the whole villa. Just a place to stay, some kind of compromise. We thought he had more than he needed. We only wanted a share." Marcus shook his head firmly. "There is no share. There is no compromise. The property belongs solely to the charity, now protected by state law. If you continue to press, you'll be pressing against the law itself." Ethan's face hardened, but his eyes betrayed the truth, fear. He knew the law wasn't bendable the way he thought I was. Still, pride kept his voice sharp. "So this is who you are now, Dad. The man who cuts off his own son, who trades blood for strangers." I leaned forward, my voice quiet but heavy enough to fill the room. "I am the man who finally stopped letting you use me. I gave and gave for years, cars, apartments, checks you never earned, and each gift only bred more greed. You call it family. I call it exploitation. And now it ends." Madison's face flushed crimson. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You've chosen enemies over us." Marcus closed the folder with a crisp snap. "This meeting is concluded. The property transfer is complete. The documents are irrevocable. This discussion is over." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Ethan pushed back his chair hard enough to screech against the floor. He didn't look at me as he stormed toward the door. Madison followed her heels, striking sharp against the tile. Gerald and Patricia trailed behind, their dignity wrinkled like their clothes. When the door closed, I sat back and let my shoulders relax. Paper walls had done what haunted lights and whispers never could. They had ended the war before another shot could be fired. When the door to the conference room shut behind them, the silence felt like a verdict. Marcus stacked the papers neatly, then looked at me with a small nod. "You executed flawlessly. Irrevocable means just that. They can fight, they can shout, but they can't change a line of what we filed." I exhaled slowly. "For the first time in years, Marcus, I don't feel like I'm waiting for the next blow." "You shouldn't," he said. "The villa is legally beyond their reach. If they so much as step onto that property, it's a matter for law enforcement." I left the office that day lighter than I had walked in. The Arizona sky outside was sharp and blue, and for once it didn't feel hostile. On the drive home, I realized something important I had already won. Not with lights or whispers or clever tricks, but with pen strokes and paper walls. That evening, I opened the villa's live feed on my laptop out of habit. At 7:12 p.m., headlights swept across the driveway. Ethan's truck. Madison in the passenger seat. They got out fast, Ethan striding to the front door as though he could will it open by force. He shoved his key into the lock, jiggled it, then slammed his hand against the frame when it didn't turn. The smart system held silent and unmoved. From my desk, I watched him pound the door with his fist. "Open up," he shouted into the dark. He didn't yell Dad, he didn't yell Richard. He barked at the villa like it was an enemy. Madison pulled out her phone, recording a video. "This is harassment," she declared into the lens. "This is an unlawful eviction." I nearly laughed. She didn't know the ink on the transfer had dried days ago. She didn't know the law had already made them ghosts in a house they once thought theirs. The next morning, my phone rang. Ethan's voice was clipped sharp, rehearsed. "We're taking legal action. We'll see you in court." "Ethan," I said evenly, "before you waste money on lawyers, check the public record. You'll find the villa isn't mine anymore, and it sure as hell isn't yours." There was silence, the kind that presses through the line heavier than words. "What did you do?" he finally spat. "I honored your mother's memory," I said. "Something you've forgotten how to do. You gave it away." His voice cracked between fury and disbelief. "To people who'll treat it with respect," I replied. "By Friday, it'll be on record for everyone to see. The villa is now a sanctuary for veterans. You lost Ethan. Not because I screamed louder, but because I finally stopped letting you push me." His breathing came ragged over the line. "You'll regret this." I ended the call with calm finality. No threats, no bargaining, just silence. As I set the phone down, I realized the war was no longer about walls or doors or property lines. It was about dignity, and mine was finally unshaken. The news broke faster than I expected. By Thursday morning, Veterans Rest Initiative posted a press release with photos of their director standing proudly on the villa's porch. The caption read, "We are honored to accept Clearview Lake Villa as a healing retreat for veterans and their families, thanks to the generous gift of Mr. Richard Hale." Within hours, the local paper picked it up, followed by 2 regional outlets. My phone buzzed constantly. Old friends, business colleagues, even neighbors offering congratulations. For once, my name was being spoken with respect, not pity. That afternoon, Ethan called again. His voice was flat, stripped of its usual arrogance. "So it's true," he said. "You'd rather give the villa to strangers than to your son." I closed my eyes, steadying my voice. "I'd rather give it to people who understand what a home is. You wanted a prize. They'll make it a sanctuary." "You've destroyed this family," he muttered. "No," I said quietly. "You did that the moment you told me to get off my own porch." He hung up without another word. I set the phone down, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, Hutchins. The villa wasn't mine anymore, not on paper, but it was safe. And Ethan's claim had been buried beneath ink and law where it belonged. The following morning, Marcus called me back into his office. "They want another meeting," he said, his tone dry. "I imagine they think persistence will change the law." I walked in, wearing the same gray suit Caroline always said made me look like I meant every word. The conference room was just as it had been polished, table lemon polish in the air papers, aligned like weapons. Ethan sat across from me, his jaw tight. Madison's eyes were bloodshot, her voice a hiss as she leaned forward. "You can't just erase us. We'll tell everyone how you manipulated us, how you trapped us in that house." Marcus didn't blink. "Tell them whatever story you like. The public record will tell them something else. A man gave a lakeside property to veterans. Journalists are already calling. Do you really want to be the ones trying to smear that Gerald tried to soften his tone? We didn't mean harm. We simply thought Richard had more than enough." I looked him straight in the eye. "And you thought wrong. More than enough doesn't make what's mine yours." Ethan slammed a fist against the table. "So you win, that's what this is. You dragged us down here just to watch you gloat." I met his fury with calm. "I didn't drag you anywhere. You came here hoping I'd fold. But for once, Ethan, I didn't. I built something you can't tear down. The silence that followed wasn't defeat, shouted in anger. It was recognition. They knew it was over. When the meeting ended, I stepped outside into the crisp Phoenix morning. For the first time in years, I felt taller, as if the weight on my shoulders had finally been lifted. The villa was no longer mine, but neither was the burden of defending it. When the second meeting ended, I walked out of Marcus's office lighter than I had in years. The fight was finished, and this time it hadn't ended with raised voices or slammed doors. It ended with silence, the kind that speaks louder than shouting. Paper walls had sealed the villa away beyond Ethan's reach, beyond his wife's ambitions, beyond her parents' greedy smiles. The following week, I drove back to Clearview. The villa looked just as it always had, cedar siding gleaming in the afternoon light, the pines leaning close as if to listen. But inside, the air felt different. Not tense, not defensive. Open. A place ready for its new purpose. Donna Ortiz, the program director, met me at the porch with her clipboard in hand. "Mr. Hale," she said warmly. "We're keeping the dedication small, but I thought you'd want to walk the house with me before our first group arrives." We moved from room to room, my voice steady as I told her about Caroline's favorite reading chair, the way the morning light spilled into the kitchen, the creak in the upstairs hallway when the rain came heavy. Dana took notes carefully, not like a guest, but like a steward. When we finished, she paused at the big window overlooking the lake. "We'll bring in couples first," she said softly. "Veterans who need space to breathe again. This house will give them that." I nodded, the knot in my chest loosening. That's what Caroline would have wanted. We were standing there when I heard tires crunching on the gravel outside. I didn't need a camera feed to know the sound. It was Ethan's SUV. He climbed the porch steps slowly, hands stuffed in his coat pockets, his eyes fixed on the wood beneath his shoes like it held an answer. He looked thinner, older, his usual fire dulled. "Is it true?" he asked finally. "It's true," I said. "The villa belongs to Veterans Rest now. It's done." He looked past me into the living room where Caroline's blanket still lay folded on the couch. His voice cracked. "I said awful things." "You did?" I agreed, but gently. He swallowed, trying to shape words he couldn't quite manage. "Madison." He began, then stopped. "We thought if we pushed hard enough, you'd go back to being the man who gave in after Mom died." I studied him for a long moment. That man mistook kindness for surrender. I stopped being him the moment you told me I wasn't welcome on my own porch. His eyes flicked down. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said quietly. "But I stopped letting you make me small." Behind me, Dana coughed softly, a reminder that this house now had a mission larger than either of us. I gestured toward the lake. "Go home, Ethan. Figure out what kind of man you want to be. If you can do that, maybe one day you'll call me not for what I own, but for who I am." He nodded once, then turned and walked back to his car. I watched his taillights fade down the road, feeling no anger, no triumph, only finality. The villa wasn't mine anymore, but it was safe. And so was I. When I finally stood alone on that porch, watching the lake shift in the fading light, I realized victory didn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looked like boundaries. Sometimes it looked like letting go of what others tried to use against you. I had spent years believing silence would keep my family together, but silence without boundaries only fed entitlement. Ethan had forced me to choose surrender or dignity, and for the first time since Caroline died, I chose myself. The villa now serves a greater purpose, just as Carolyn would have wanted. Veterans and their families will sit in the chairs, once stolen by arrogance, and find healing in the same walls. My son may call again one day, not as a claimant, but as a man who's learned respect. Until then, I carry no hatred, only the peace that comes with knowing I stood firm. For those of you listening, remember this family is not defined by blood alone. It is defined by respect, by the boundaries we honor, and the love we do not exploit. If you are a parent giving everything and receiving only demands, think carefully. Love doesn't mean surrender. Boundaries don't destroy families, they preserve them. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand your ground against your own family? How did you handle it, and what did you learn? Share your story in the comments. If this story spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for listening.